Dim the lights on your starship, activate your emotion chip, and get ready for a Victorian Christmas because we are getting pushed overboard into the first Star Trek The Next Generation movie, 1994's Star Trek Generations, this time on Blind Spots and Second Thoughts. Greetings and welcome to Blind Spots and Second Thoughts. I'm Dan.
I'm Heather.
And we've got a super nerdy episode today, so ready your phasers and check your inertial dampers. Heather, what do you know about Star Trek Generations?
I don't know anything. I'm so excited.
Why don't you talk a little bit about your Star Trek journey?
Okay, so my Star Trek journey is that I had seen some episodes of Star Trek when I was growing up. My mom is a fan. I remember seeing just bits and pieces of what I now know is Next Generation and Voyager. But I had never actually sat down and watched any episodes until very recently when you wanted to watch some episodes of Next Generation. And I agreed to try it out and became absolutely hooked. And we watched the entire series of Next Generation, except for the first season, and are currently, as we're recording this, in the middle of watching Deep Space Nine.
So what do you think happens in this movie?
I'm not sure because when we did start watching the show, we had talked about the fact that there were movies that were part of the Star Trek universe, but I did actually at one point wonder what the movies would be about exactly, because the show is very... I look at Next Generation especially as having some overarching stories, but for the most part being kind of Monster of the Week episodes.
Episodic, yeah.
Yeah. And we're only 3 seasons into Deep Space Nine. And I know that there are some more longer term storylines in that show, but still there's just episodic one-off storylines. So I don't know what the movies might be about, to be perfectly honest. I would think that the movies would probably feature some kind of confrontation with one of the other species or races that we know of, like the Klingons or the Romulans or something like that, but I really have no idea.
Okay. I know you know the Next Generation cast because we very recently watched through that. What characters can you name from the original series?
The original series: Captain Kirk, Scotty, Spock. I think that might be it.
Really?
If you said others, I might remember them, but I'm drawing a blank when I'm trying to come up with them on my own.
Okay. So, Uhura.
Sounds sort of familiar. That's a woman.
Yeah, that's Nichelle Nichols' character. Sulu.
Oh, Sulu, yes.
Chekhov.
Oh, yeah.
And Bones.
No.
Dr. McCoy.
No.
Wow, really? Okay. So, released in the fall of 1994, I do not like that. Star Trek Generations is actually the 7th Star Trek film following Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, and very, very quickly following the end of Star Trek The Next Generation, which was aired in May of the same year.
What month did you say the movie came out?
In the fall.
Okay.
So I think it was November. So yeah, they pretty much rolled straight over from shooting the finale to making this movie. Fun fact, because 1994, Star Trek Generations is credited with being the first movie to have its own official website.
Oh, that's fun. That fact is fun.
So yeah, the Next Generation crew had to immediately jump to filming the movie right after wrap on the show since production deadlines were so tight. The movie was actually being written at the same time as All Good Things, the series finale, which apparently caused the writers to sometimes mix up their stories occasionally.
That makes sense.
The movie's budget was somewhere between 25 and 35 million, which seems pretty paltry compared to comic book movies and a lot of the other tentpole action movies today. The movie was written by Ronald D. Moore and Brannon Braga, who had both written for Next Generation. Moore, of course, went on to write for Deep Space Nine before creating and developing the Battlestar Galactica reboot, Outlander, and For All Mankind.
Some of which I have seen.
Braga continued to write for Star Trek Voyager, Enterprise, and then later consider The Orville, which I haven't watched, but as I understand, it's sort of Seth MacFarlane's big budget Star Trek fan fiction.
Oh, very interesting.
It was directed by David Carson, who had not made any feature films before, but had directed some pretty good episodes of Next Generation, including Yesterday's Enterprise and The Enemy and the Deep Space Nine pilot Emissary.
Oh, okay.
I did see this film in theaters. So I actually was, I grew up on Star Trek. I was there, I want to say opening weekend. It might not have been opening weekend.
Adorable.
I don't remember, but I did see this movie in theaters, and I am not sure if I have seen the whole movie since.
Oh.
So it may have been 30 years since I've watched this whole movie. So we'll see if my original impressions of this movie hold up.
I am assuming you're not going to tell me what those original impressions were. All right.
But we'll see. We'll see. I'll go into this and we'll see what I remember and how this movie holds up.
All right, let's do it.
I must have jumped that 50 times. Scared the hell out of me each time. Except this time. Because it isn't real.
Antonia.
She isn't real either, is she? Nothing here is. Nothing here matters. You know, maybe this isn't about an empty house. Maybe it's about that empty chair on the bridge of the Enterprise. Ever since I left Starfleet, I haven't made a difference. Captain of the Enterprise.
That's right.
Close to retirement?
I'm not planning on it.
Let me tell you something. Don't let them promote you. Don't let them transfer you. Don't let them do anything that takes you off the bridge of that ship, because while you're there, you can make a difference.
Come back with me. Help me stop Solon. Make a difference again.
Who am I to argue with the captain of the Enterprise? What's the name of that planet? Viridian 3?
Yes.
I take it the odds are against us and the situation is grim.
You could say that.
You know, if Spock were here, he'd say that I was an irrational, illogical human being for taking on a mission like that. Sounds like fun.
Okay, so Star Trek Generations. Mm-hmm. What did you think?
I was so happy to be back with my friends. I liked it.
Really?
Yeah.
That's funny. I was going to apologize.
Why?
I do not like this movie.
Oh, okay.
I really do not like this movie.
There were things that I did not like, but maybe my judgment was clouded by just being excited to be seeing them again. I almost started crying in the opening credits.
Just from seeing everyone's names.
Yeah.
I mean, the movie's a mess. It really was. Mm-hmm. They were in a rush to make it. They were doing reshoots for the ending in September, and it came out in November. So it was... There was a lot of production hell around this. One of the things, I don't know if this stood out to you, they're wearing two kinds of uniforms. The crew is split between their old Next Generation uniforms and the Deep Space Nine uniforms, the ones where they've got black on the bottom and the color on the shoulders. Mm-hmm. And in fact, it's not even consistent. Like Riker is wearing his old uniform at the beginning of the movie, and then he's wearing the Deep Space Nine style uniform for the rest of the movie towards the end. Is
it only the Deep Space Nine style where they're wearing like a turtleneck and that's what their pips are on?
Yeah, well, so the Deep Space Nine style is the one, and you can tell it because it's reversed, because the Next Generation style has the color mostly down on the torso, and the shoulders are dark.
I don't know that I did notice it, but even if I had, I would have thought maybe it was like, so I went to Catholic school and we had uniforms, but we had different uniforms. You know, we could wear different colors.
Right.
So they were all, you know, uniform compliant, but there were options. There were varieties.
Yeah, that's how navies are, right? You can just wear something that's like, oh, all right, I feel like.
I'm not a military historian.
They had apparently designed new uniforms because it was sort of a tradition for the Star Trek movies. They introduced new uniforms for the original motion picture, and then they introduced a different uniform style that they wore through Star Trek 2 through Star Trek 6 with a few little variations. That apparently was the uniform style mostly through the era of the Enterprise C, because that's what they're wearing in that era. So that uniform apparently had staying power and was around for 80-something years. So they were going to introduce a new uniform style and decided at the last minute that it was too much, or they didn't like it, or something like that. So they scrapped it, but apparently the toy people didn't get the memo in time. So there were toys released that had the new uniform style that never got used and never got shown on screen.
Huh. That's kind of fun, though. Collector's item.
Mm-hmm. But the movie, they were wearing different uniforms. Apparently, Jonathan Frakes' uniform didn't fit well because he was borrowing Avery Brooks' uniform from Deep Space Nine.
Okay.
And LeVar Burton's uniform also didn't fit well because he was borrowing Cole Meany's from Deep Space Nine.
All right.
But it's just, I don't know. There's fun moments, and it's fun that it's like, hey, it's the Next Generation cast. But it's just such a wet thud of a movie overall.
Aw. Well, yeah, I don't know. Like I said, there were definitely things that I didn't like, but overall, I don't know. I was just excited to see them again.
Did you have favorite moments or favorite scenes?
Favorite moments. Oh, yes. It was Jonathan Frakes saying fire. It gave me chills.
Just that close up when they go to destroy the Duras sisters' bird of prey.
Yes. And they've tricked the Klingon ship into recloaking, and the shields are down, and he just says, fire. And I was like, woo, yes, woo.
Anything else that stood out? Anything else that...
When they were in the Nexus, I don't know that I would say that this is a favorite part, but I did note that Kirk was reunited with his dog in the Nexus. And I was like, oh, I want to go to the Nexus and be reunited with Simon.
Aw, Simon is your cat who passed away last year.
Yes. And I miss him. And so I was like, oh, I would do that. That would be lovely.
Funnily enough, I don't believe it was ever mentioned that Kirk had a dog previously.
Well, fair enough.
It's not something like...
What about his wife, girlfriend?
No, she was also... They gave both Picard and Kirk significant others who were never mentioned before. You know, Picard had some very strong romances from a couple of episodes, and they could have chosen from any one of those.
I mean, Gates McFadden was there.
Right.
When he sees his family, his wife and children that never existed, it was kind of panning up to her face. And I thought it might be Crusher.
Yeah, and she's a redhead, too.
Yeah.
And it wasn't.
No, she was right there. Okay.
I like it better when Picard and Crusher aren't romantically paired. Apparently, I haven't watched, full disclosure, I have not watched Picard. I started it and was dissatisfied with the direction of it, so I did not complete the show, but I've kind of kept up with some of the goings on. But generally speaking, I like their will they, won't they relationship firmly on the won't they side.
I mean, I don't necessarily want them to be together either, but it just felt very random, this family and this wife. And why is his dream life in the 17th century?
We'll get to that. Yeah, that scene does stand out. Just generally, I don't know. I remember being very disappointed. They spent so much time advertising this movie as like a meeting of the captains and bridging the gap between the original crew and the Next Generation and passing the torch between the crews. And it's really just a overly long intro sequence that has a couple of the original crew, not even the full original crew. And then it's a Next Generation movie that just happens to have Kirk at the end. And that's really it. And so the marketing, I remember the hype around it was, I guess Paramount was a lot better at hyping things than they were at making things at that point. So I remember being very disappointed and let down by all of that. I was reading up on some of the criticisms. I don't remember which critic it was, but someone said it feels like 3 episodes of the show awkwardly stapled together. And it does.
I could see that, yeah.
It doesn't feel like a really coherent movie. There are some good scenes in it, but generally, I don't know. It doesn't hold up to me. It's not my least favorite Star Trek movie because there are worse ones. But yeah, I don't care for Generations.
Okay,
So
well, fair enough.
my original assessment stands, I think.
I did think at the end when Kirk and Picard are first reunited in the Nexus that they are a buddy comedy duo that I would watch.
Yeah, I think they had good chemistry, and the way that their acting styles are different. You know, Patrick Stewart's very pronounced and staccato, and William Shatner's very relaxed and very kind of comfortable in this role that he's been playing for 40 years at this point. I think it's fun to see them mesh together, and they actually did have really good chemistry, I thought.
I agree.
But yeah, the movie really does not spend very much time with them together either.
No, that's true.
So, fun fact, apparently the original movie, and the reason why they did reshoots, in the original cut of the movie, Kirk was shot in the back, and that's how he died. And everyone hated it, apparently.
By Malcolm McDowell?
Yeah.
Okay.
So they showed it to test audiences, and test audiences hated it, and it just felt like they messed up on the ending. So that's why they did those reshoots. They basically had to fit together with footage that they already had, and they got something like $5 million to do a reshoot. William Shatner had to wear a wig because apparently he had started growing his hair out. So...
I'm interested in exactly how that scene would have progressed because he dies when the sort of bridge collapses. When he's trying to rescue the control pad for the probe, it would have been very unlikely that control pad would have still been on the other side of that bridge after it had come apart and just everything was shaking and falling. So that seems a little tacked on the whole setup for his death. Also feels a little haphazard.
Well, because it was.
Yeah.
Well, any other thoughts on the movie before we get to the recap?
It was so dark.
Yeah, like
literally dark. No, literally dark, not not thematically.
I mean, thematically, it's a little dark,
well, that too, but I meant the lighting was dim.
Right. No, we spent 7 years on the set that they lit. I mean, for TV purposes, it makes sense to have very bright lighting because it's much faster to do setups and much faster to shoot your scenes when you've got this very bright global lighting all the time. But also, we spent 7 years on this ship and we're used to it having lights.
Exactly. No, I get why the lighting would be different, but it made me sad because I was like, this isn't my Enterprise.
Right. And it's so dark. And it's even in contrast because when you see the Enterprise B in the beginning, it's lit more like all of the other Star Trek movies. So like even you haven't watched the original series movies. In the original series movies, starting from the original motion picture, it is a refit of the Enterprise. So it's supposed to be, in theory, the first couple of movies are the same ship from the original series, but it's been completely refit. So it's got a new bridge and everything like that. And then they introduced the Enterprise A, which is because they do introduce a tradition of the Enterprise either getting blown up or getting just its shit rocked in Star Trek movies. So that's just a thing that happens, and Generations carries that tradition forward. The original Enterprise gets blown up at least once, and then it really does get bodied another couple of times, but it doesn't get blown up again. And then, the Enterprise D gets rocked here. So
very sad.
Yeah. And even the newer ones, the Abrams verse movies, the ones with Chris Pine as Captain Kirk. The Enterprise gets blown up in one of those too. So,
well, it's tradition.
It is tradition. Those movies were still lit in kind of that same way. So you saw that in the Enterprise B, where it's more subdued lighting than you would see on Next Generation, where it's just very bright lights all the time, but it's still lit. And then you get to the Enterprise D sets and it's just dark.
So dark.
There's the
everywhere.
There was the scene in the observation deck when there were literally no lights on at all. Picard and Troi are having this dramatic conversation and there's just like golden light from the outside and there's no lights on whatsoever.
But even that, I'm like, okay, maybe he was morose, so the lighting matches his mood. I don't know. But the bridge was very dark, and the bridge should be lit because you need to be able to see what you're doing.
I remember at the time reading a contemporary joke about imagining someone running around unscrewing all the light bulbs in the Enterprise.
It was probably Q. We just don't see him, uncredited.
Q was going around and just turning off the lights.
Yeah, that's
to mess with everyone.
That's my little theory. He's a scamp.
He is a scamp. Q is a scamp, and I can quote you on that.
Yes, I will go on the record.
Okay, so let's get to recapping the movie. It begins with very ominous music. And then you see a bottle of Dom Perignon just floating through space as we watch the opening credits.
Yes.
It's nice to know that even in the 2200s, Dom Perignon is still a very nice
It was
champagne.
vintage 2265.
They also have not changed their label in
Why mess with the classic?
several hundred years. Kirk and friends are present for the commissioning and the test voyage of the Enterprise B. So this is the first Enterprise in Starfleet that's not been a Constitution class.
Okay.
So they invite Kirk and his friends on to the Enterprise.
His friends who also worked on the Enterprise.
Yes.
You make it sound like he just got +2.
Well, it's funny because it was actually originally supposed to be the original trio. So the original trio in the original series was Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. They bounced off each other. They had a fun dynamic and they were like the original anchors of the show. There were other characters, obviously, but they were sort of the original trinity. They were the ones who the show was anchored around and their relationship. Leonard Nimoy and DeForest Kelley did not feel like this was a good reason for them to show up. They had both felt like their characters had been given good send-offs in Star Trek VI. On top of that, Leonard Nimoy had said that these lines are not Spock. You could give them to any other character. And so he was very protective of the Spock character. Again, you know, a character he's been playing for 40-something years. And it turns out that he's right because they did just give a lot of his lines to Scotty. And you can even tell because if you watch it with that knowledge, some of the things that Kirk says to Scotty really don't make sense for Scotty, but they absolutely make sense if he's saying them to Spock.
Like what? Do you have any examples?
It's something about like when they're trying to figure out how to get into the Nexus and beam people off or save the Enterprise B or get them out of there. Scotty does some calculations and Kirk says something like, I knew you'd be able to figure it out. And it's just kind of the way the lines are. And I didn't write them down specifically, but just that exchange and the way that it happens. It also makes a lot more sense when you realize that Chekhov, who was the Khan, is going down and doing medical stuff.
I was going to ask, so was McCoy?
McCoy was the doctor.
I was so confused because I was going to ask you if Chekhov was the medical officer.
No,
and then I
looked
up the characters after we watched it and I was like, oh, he was the first officer.
No, he wasn't the first officer. He was the Khan. Spock was the first officer.
Oh, okay. Well, he wasn't the medical officer.
Right.
And so I did definitely note that.
Yeah. So he's running down and he's doing Bones' stuff. And then you have Scotty on the bridge doing Spock stuff.
Gotta
and then
take
you
it to the
have
bridge.
Kirk running down to do engineering stuff when Scotty's right there.
That is very messy. They couldn't have just rewritten it for the characters that were going to be in it.
Again, they had such a tight production deadline that was about as good as they could get. But,
all right, fair enough.
You know, they were presumably high on cocaine writing both the show and the movie at the same time. So who knows?
You get what you get.
So they are at the commissioning of the Enterprise B with Alan Ruck as Captain Harriman.
Captain Connor Roy.
I overheard him telling reporters that Captain Harriman was interested in politics from a very young age. They also had in the background Tim Russ, but as a human. Tim Russ would later go on to famously be cast as Tuvok on Star Trek Voyager. So he was the second officer on Voyager. He was a Vulcan on that show. He also played several other parts on Next Generation and Deep Space Nine.
Have we seen them, the Deep Space Nine episodes? Because I feel like I recognize that name from the credits.
Yes, I believe so. I can't remember. I think he was a Klingon on... He was a Klingon on Deep Space Nine, and he was in the TNG episode called Starship Mine, which is the one that's basically Die Hard on the Enterprise. He was one of the terrorists.
Okay.
There is a distress call, and they are the only ship in the solar system or anywhere nearby. They have to go rescue these ships. Nothing arrives till Tuesday, including the plot.
Good one.
So they have a ship that's not really fully functional or fully crewed. They go and find what we later find out is the Nexus ribbon, which destroys that one ship, which prompts the Enterprise to go in and get them to jump into action and start transporting away survivors from the second ship. Among those survivors are a very distressed Malcolm McDowell playing Soren and a surprise Guinan.
Yes, I saw her hat and I was like, I know who that flat hat belongs to. That big flat hat, that's Guinan for sure.
There's a hat and braids. It's Guinan. So there's a distress call, and even though they are literally just in the solar system, they haven't even left the solar system yet, there's apparently no other ships around in the area that can help. No other fully functional ships in the area. I feel like in the solar system, Earth is both, not only the home of humanity, but also the head of the Federation. That's where the Federation headquarters are and Starfleet headquarters are. I feel like they should have more ships in our star system.
You would think.
But there are no other ships around, apparently. So the Enterprise B has to respond. Captain Harriman is not terribly competent. That's what happens when you put the first pancake in charge.
True. He was not terribly confident either.
Yeah, I think I did read in some of the background material, they told Alan Ruck to play him like a nepo baby.
Oh, okay.
So he's essentially like, he didn't really
He
earn
was
his
preparing
command.
for his later role as Connor Roy.
Exactly.
So my question about the chain of command is, he's the captain, so I know he's in charge, but he's making decisions and Kirk is in the background just shaking his head like, that's not going to work. And then he only goes into action when Alan Ruck says, Captain Kirk, I would appreciate any suggestions you have. And I'm like, did he have to wait until he asked for help? Because people died.
Yes, he did. Because, if you are in command of the ship, and that's like, even if there's an admiral on board or whatever, they still have to respect the chain of command. Otherwise, the admiral has to take command and say, I'm relieving you of your command. I am taking over this ship. And now everyone has to. So yes, if you are.
But a captain can't do that to another captain?
No.
Because Alan Ruck was like, what about this? And then Kirk shakes his head and then Alan Ruck does it and the ship explodes. So I'm like, well, those people just paid the price for the chain of command. That sucks.
Yeah, it does suck.
All right. Well, that is the impression that I had gotten about how it works, but I didn't have to like it.
It's also a big deal. Like if you get relieved of your command, that's like a huge black mark on your record. And it's a very
There were 200 plus people on that ship.
They're not Klingons, but it's a very dishonorable thing to have happen.
That was bad enough. And then after both the ships explode, then Kirk is going to go down to try to, I actually can't remember exactly what he's going to do when he goes
He's going to do an engineering. He has to go.
Oh, right. Okay. He's going to go to
engineering.
engineering. And when he leaves, he and Scotty are like quipping and then he's smiling as the turbo lift door closes. And I'm like, over 300 people just died. Maybe sober up a little bit.
I mean, to be fair, it's space and 300 people die like all the time.
Oh my God, that doesn't make it okay.
You get desensitized to it.
It's like, I don't even know you anymore.
I'm just saying, you get like when you're dealing with space monsters and godlike beings and near extinction on a regular basis, you do get desensitized to that sort of thing.
I guess so, but they were very worked up when things started to go wrong on the bridge of that ship. And I was thinking, this is not what I'm used to, because I feel like even when things are going very badly on Next Generation, you know, they might be upset, they might be very serious, but they were very collected.
They're not very, they, on Next Generation, we've talked about before how I've read it described as competence porn. And it really is. You're watching people who are, for the most part, very, very good at their jobs. And that's one of the fun things about watching Next Generation, is because you have these people who are just very good at their jobs and you get to watch them doing their jobs. It's a really good example of that. And they aren't rattled very often.
Exactly. But they are later in this movie, because I definitely noticed how freaked out everyone was on the Enterprise B. And I was like, this is not what I'm used to. But then later in the movie, when things are going wrong on the Enterprise D, everyone is freaking out again. They get rattled. And I was like, what is this?
It's a movie. You got to raise the stakes.
I suppose.
It worked, apparently.
I guess.
So Kirk does go to do an engineering thing, to do a thing. It's technobabble. It doesn't matter.
No,
really,
I guess.
It really is.
It's
It's technobabble. It's to get him off the bridge. There is an incredibly long scene of Kirk just climbing through stuff. It feels like it goes on for 10 minutes where you're just watching
William
Kirk.
Shatner was probably like, I might be older, but I can still do stuff. Watch me do stuff.
Watch me do stuff. I can climb.
Yeah.
I can hop. I can climb more things. And then he's blown into space. And that's...
I didn't believe he was dead.
Well...
I mean, it made sense.
Sure.
But the saying, no body, no crime.
Right.
I was thinking, no body, no captain got sucked into space. Although I guess he technically did, but he didn't die. I mean, he didn't have very much to do at that point. I thought this also, I think I had seen a little thumbnail of him and Picard together. So I knew that they were going to interact at some point in the movie. Yeah,
I mean, it was very heavily featured in the marketing and the trailers. So I don't think there was a single person going into this movie who wouldn't have known that they were going to meet.
So it wasn't really a twist per se.
It wasn't a twist or a surprise. I do like to think that there was a deleted scene where Captain Harriman eulogized Captain Kirk. He said, "I'm here as a fellow human to acknowledge that Captain Kirk has, as we know, passed on. James Kirk was a man. Also, Kirk was in Starfleet for 40 years. And when a man dies, it is sad. All of us will die one day. In this case, it is Kirk who has done so. Kirk was alive for 60 years. Now he is dead. Kirk's best friend is Spock. He is a Vulcan. Now he is sad."
Now he is sad. Oh, that's amazing. Best part of Succession. My favorite scene in Succession.
So then we flash to 78 years later, as the title card helpfully lets us know. And Worf is finally promoted to Lieutenant Commander.
Yay, Worf.
And there's the ship scene where they're on the holodeck and they are on board a sailing ship, Enterprise.
Apparently they always do this when someone is promoted.
So, yeah, they just have the budget for it now.
They didn't do it for Deanna.
Yeah, they didn't do it for Troi. She just shows up on the bridge. She's like, "I'm a commander now."
Yeah.
And Data's like, "Oh, I see you've been promoted in my absence." And she's like, "Yeah, you're going to have to get used to calling me sir."
Poor Deanna.
This movie really does not care if you have never seen a Star Trek. They were not at all trying to get on board new people. They just assume you know who these people are. You are here for one reason and one reason only, which is that you are a Next Generation nerd. There is zero expositional catch up or letting you know who any of these people are.
Absolutely. I'm thinking about it now and I'm realizing that there are several characters that I don't think ever introduced themselves in any way. Riker, Troi.
Right. You just have to know who they are. Yeah. No, this movie 100% is just like, we know you watch the show, nerds. No one is going to see this movie except for Star Trek nerds, so we're not even going to bother trying to catch anyone else up.
I really wished that in the ship scene, they would have sang "For He's a Jolly Good Klingon."
That would have been great.
I would have loved that.
So it is a fun scene. It's silly, but it's fun. And it's fun in the way that like, it's our next generation friends having fun.
Absolutely. But it does plant a seed for something that's going to be a big part of the movie.
Right. Which is when Data pushes Crusher off the ship.
You know, I felt really bad for Data that Crusher was mad at him.
Right.
Because he was like, why is it funny that he fell in the water? And she's like, it's humor. You should do something unexpected. And then he pushes her in the water and she's mad?
Yeah, she reacts very strongly. For somebody who's typically been patient with Data, she reacts very, very strongly for that, which is they're on a holodeck. They're not really in any kind of danger
You
at
just
all.
told him that falling in the water is funny.
And then also
pushing people into water is a classic gag.
And like, if the water is cold or uncomfortable, then that's when you just say, computer, raise temperature of water. Like,
yeah, true.
She's so upset about it, and everyone else is upset with Data. And it's like, it really is kind of funny, though.
Well, I guess, yes. But Data needs to have a reason to have an existential crisis.
Right. But also, I thought it was funny. That's pretty much all that Crusher gets to do for this whole movie.
That's true. She shows up when Geordi comes back after having been taken hostage and fixes him.
And she gets a couple of expositional lines about Soren, and that's it.
Yeah. Troi doesn't really have too much to do in the movie either.
Well, she gets to crash the ship.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, that's true.
But yeah, that's really all Crusher gets to do is just get indignant about...
Be a killjoy.
Yeah, be a killjoy and get wet, and then thanks for showing up.
Yep.
Hey, you know what? She got her paycheck.
Yeah,
so.
I hope it was good. I hope it was worth it.
I thought, even though it's a silly and a fun scene, Geordi using the telescope with his visor was just dumb.
I thought it was funny.
Such a dumb shot. So Picard gets the message that his family has died in a fire.
Yes. And not to jump ahead, but later when he is talking to Troi about it and just feeling his feelings about the situation, Troi says... she's sorry. And he says, these things happen. No.
It's the future.
And also, even in the present, most people don't die in a fire.
At a vineyard.
These things happen.
It's like the IT crowd. Like, he died in a fire.
At a sea park.
At a vineyard. Just imagine Barkley in a corner, like trying to figure it out.
I wish Barkley had been there.
Like he's got like a little Picard vineyard, and he's like seeing where the fire started,
Yes.
and he's like, okay, if Robert and Renee were here, and the fire started here, and the French fire drones, which assumably there are, couldn't make it in time.
It doesn't.
Like they have force fields that can put out fires, and they have drones, and they have all kinds of future stuff. And like, oh, I don't know, there's a fire breaking out. Let me use a transporter to,
to
just get out of there.
It does kind of feel like some of these elements of the movie were retrofitted to explain certain things that the characters are going to do, or certain things that are going to happen later on. Like Picard's family dying is going to give him this sort of introspection about not having his own family and not having anyone to carry on his name, which is then going to be the justification for why he might want to stay in the Nexus, because he has this family there. But it's like, okay, how do we get it so that this scene has impact? Well, his family will die in a fire. Even though it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Originally, it was supposed to be just his brother, Robert, who died. And it was something like he just died of a heart attack or something like just natural, because he was Jean-Luc's older brother. And then Patrick Stewart, being Patrick Stewart, saying, well, it's more dramatic if his whole family dies. And so they were like, yeah, all right, sure, whatever.
The nephew had to die so that there was more meaning behind his 12 little Victorian children.
More drama. More acting.
That's a good Patrick Stewart impression.
So Picard finds out his family has died in a fire, and he leaves the holodeck.
He's very angry.
He's
very angry.
He's very upset.
I mean, that is understandable, but he's just lashing out in a way that it doesn't fit his character. You know, he is always so stoic. We've seen him go through difficult periods before and difficult situations.
He's lost like an entire lifetime.
Yes.
He's lost his humanity to the Borg. He's been through a lot.
And he's always been very stoic.
He's been tortured by Cardassians.
Well, and I think that the moment I'm thinking of where that stoicism breaks is when he says, there are 4 lights. But he's been tortured before that happens.
Right.
This seems like 0 to 100.
Well, you know, his family died in a fire.
Okay, look, I'm not saying it's not sad that his family died in a fire, but he's basically estranged from his brother, or he was for a long time.
Well, yeah, but
I mean, he's in space and they're in France.
He did say there's a line about he was supposed to see them in a month.
That's true.
And apparently they've been on good terms since that episode.
No, fine. That's all fine.
The 4th season.
But all I'm saying is, even though they're family and even though they had rekindled their relationship, he has been in space and they are in France. And I just feel like a lot of the other stuff that he's been through is actually worse than that.
I don't know. I mean, you could say that it's different because it's happened to his family as opposed to it's happening to him. Like,
True.
He's the kind of person who's like, you know, torture me or take me or whatever and spare everyone else. He'll take the burdens of the universe on his back. I think that's in character with Picard. So
okay,
him being angry because it's his family, because his family died in a fire.
All right, we need to move on from this.
No, I'm never going to move on from that. I think that's consistent with his character.
I see your point.
He has been very private and very withdrawn, and he's incredibly rattled and incredibly rude when that first happens. So there's an observatory that's in trouble. There's always trouble at observatories in Star Trek. Things never go right at an observatory, and they get a distress call. I think it's funny to see everyone on the bridge in their naval uniforms, like they all got dressed up for for Worf's ceremony, and then they have to rush back to the bridge. Some of them still have their swords and stuff.
I thought that was fun.
They find everyone on the observatory dead except for Soren, who is not at all being suspicious and not at all, there's no reason.
Nope, he seems totally cool.
Totally on the up and up. Then Data has his existential crisis, and we see the emotion chip that's just spinning for no reason. Like, why is it just...
Wasn't it in like a box before?
They've shown it 3 times, and every time they've shown it looks completely different.
Sure, why not?
So this time it's bigger and spinning for some reason. He decides that it's time for him to put in his emotion chip.
Yes. And hilarity ensues. Is it supposed to be funny?
It is.
Okay.
It is 100% supposed to be funny.
It's not.
I do think the original scene, the first scene in 10 Forward, when he's like, I hate it. That scene's kind of funny.
Yeah, that one's okay.
After that, it just becomes incredibly grating and obnoxious.
Yes.
I do remember there being a lot of marketing around the scene where he goes, yes, after they blow up the bird of prey.
I was fine with that moment too, but some of the other stuff was just so... And to me, it was not only not funny, it was very unsettling.
Well, if you give Brent Spiner any scenery to chew, he is going to make a meal out of it.
He's quite a ham.
So having Data get the emotions finally, again, it's mostly played for laughs.
Although I did question whether it was entirely played for laughs because it was very obnoxious. It was very annoying. And I was thinking at one point, could they not have given him a good sense of humor with this emotion chip rather than just, puppeteering the tricorder and laughing at all of his own stupid jokes? But then it does become a thing where I think it's Geordi saying to him, this is not the time. You need to stop. And he says, I can't stop. And that there's a couple of different times when it comes up that Data is not in control of these emotions. So then I was like, well, maybe it is supposed to be a little bit unsettling because he is overloaded with emotions that he can't handle, which relatable. So then I wasn't sure if it was supposed to be entirely funny or kind of dark, or am I just giving too much credit to?
I mean, I don't think it's supposed to be entirely comic relief. I do think the scene where Geordi says to Data, chill out, this is not the time for that. That scene is, I think he's supposed to be a little grating in that scene. And even that's the scene where Data freaks out and can't stop laughing. Mm-hmm. And they like do a weird 90s CGI thing with his face.
I said, is he the Joker?
But then I think the rest of the movie is meant to be comic relief, like his little life forms song and some of that stuff. It's basically, they turned Data into full on comic relief.
Okay. But he is wrestling with the emotions. I mean, he does also have that scene with Picard where he asks to be relieved. Mm-hmm. Well, not just relieved of duty, but deactivated because he doesn't want to have these emotions anymore. And as I said, relatable. But that's more poignant.
He thought it was an emotion chip, but really it was an anxiety chip.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he should talk to me.
Getting back to the plot, Data does go to 10 Forward to try drinks, and that's when Picard finds Soren, and Soren says some cold shit to him. We don't know at the time. You didn't know, I don't think, about, because we hadn't found out that Picard's family had died in a fire.
But we knew something had happened.
Right. But Soren's line is, they say time is the fire in which we burn.
Oh! Oh no, I didn't catch that.
And that's why it really rattles Picard. And so in hindsight, you're kind of like, oh, that makes sense. And that also explains why Picard is like, yeah, fine, go finish your experiment or whatever.
Oh,
because
that's horrific.
He's super rattled. But yeah, you don't find that out until a second viewing when you're like, oh, right.
Wow. Yeah, no, I definitely didn't catch that.
So there's the scene where Data and Geordi are looking for stuff, and Data is being incredibly obnoxious. Soren beams over, and surprise, he's the bad guy. Oh no.
I was shocked.
Right.
Malcolm McDowell just has such a trustworthy face.
Has Malcolm McDowell ever played a good guy?
I don't know that he has.
He knocks out Geordi with one punch, and Data is paralyzed with fear, which is, I guess, understandable because he's never really experienced fear before, but also like Data could totally body Malcolm McDowell. It cuts to Picard telling Troi that his family died in a fire. And there's a lot of acting. That scene is that is a very kind of traditional Picard scene where he's got a lot of emotional discussion of things, and Troi is more or less just a sounding board.
Well,
and she's
except for
being
when
Troi.
he says, these things happen. I can't get over that.
A fire at a winery. A fire at a vineyard.
Like, what are you going to do? That's what it sounds like when he says that. I'm like,
In the future, when they have force fields and transporters.
And that's a good Chris O'Dowd.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, I have one other note. That when Picard is telling Deanna that his family
died in a fire.
She asks him what's wrong, and he says, it's just family matters. Picard is a big Urkel fan.
It's just family matters. Their matter has been combusted. So the scene with the acting is then interrupted by the arrival of the Duras sisters, Lursa and Betor, who show up in a rickety old bird of prey, and that then gets
a cheer.
A cheer?
They get a cheer.
They get a cheer?
I cheered for them.
You cheered for the Duras sisters?
I mean, it was good to see them for the last time, apparently.
Yeah.
Spoiler.
R.I.P. boob windows.
Yes.
They show up, and Soren escapes with Geordi and kidnaps Geordi.
And then he presumably just stows him somewhere on the Klingon ship, because we don't see Geordi again until he's transported back to the Enterprise.
No, we see him get tortured. There's the scene, because he gets tortured again. There's the scene between Soren and Geordi where Geordi is naked on a slab. And
how fast is the scene? Was I taking a note and missed it?
Maybe. It's the scene, he's talking to him and he's talking about his visor, He's like, this is a fascinating device. And he's messing with his visor, and then he's like torturing him and stuff. Apparently there was a deleted scene where he is doing other stuff to him and his heart stops for a few seconds. So that's why there's a line later on when it says something like his heart wasn't in it. It's because he fake killed Geordi for a few moments, but they cut that scene. But yeah, it's just reheated. It's like, how many times has Geordi been kidnapped or had his visor messed with or been tortured? Several.
You would think that they would check his visor after he had been held hostage.
Yeah, especially basically anytime after someone has taken Geordi's visor off and messed with it, it's time to examine that visor, Geordi.
Yeah.
The star is destroyed. The Enterprise leaves. They find out who Soren is. Picard gets an exposition dump from Guinan. So we get to see Guinan's quarters, which they look like Guinan's quarters. Yeah. I think the set decorator did a good job. I'm like, yeah, that tracks.
She wasn't wearing a hat in her quarters. I was very disappointed.
Well, hats are not for home. I don't know.
I would think she would wear the biggest hat at home.
She's like, let me put on my conversation hat.
Yeah. I love her big flat hats, and I don't apologize for it.
After the exposition dump, Picard and Data go to stellar cartography, which we've seen in the show, but it's gotten a big upgrade.
Yes. I didn't know that that's what it was, stellar cartography. I was referring to it as the map room. And I thought it was very snazzy.
They made such a big deal about it. I remember seeing, if I remember correctly at the time, I remember seeing a whole Entertainment Tonight segment where they were talking about the upgraded visuals for Star Trek Generations. And they spent a lot of time talking about the stellar cartography set and how it was a big deal. And they had all these big fancy computer generated visuals, which for, 1994, it was a pretty cool special effect. It hasn't aged amazingly, but it looks, it is more or less in line with special effects that you would see now for like a screen room like that. But yeah, they made such a big deal about that set.
It was fun. I liked it.
It was fun. And honestly, it is a good traditional Data scene, because I think that's a good staple of the series, where Data has a crisis of humanity, more or less, and Picard sets him straight. One of the first episodes of Next Generation I showed you is the one where Data has his little crisis of confidence and feels like he can't perform. And then that's when Picard has to give him the speech of, that is not a weakness, that is life. You made a mistake. It is possible to commit no errors and still lose. That is not a weakness, that is life. And that is one of the classic relationships. So it was fun to see kind of a different version of that playing out in this movie, where it's Data's having a crisis because of his emotions, and Picard is like, everyone gets that, dude, just get over it.
I feel like that was the best way to deal with it, because Data didn't have the previous experience dealing with what he was experiencing in that moment, but to be told, this is not really a malfunction. This is just what it's like to live with emotions. And you are still an officer on this ship, and you have to learn how to navigate it. I think that was, it seemed to work. Yeah,
like I said, I think that's probably one of the best scenes in the movie. It works well, and Spiner and Stewart always play very well off of each other. Yeah. So I did like that scene. So they figure out where the ribbon is going. Apparently you can't fly a ship into the Nexus for some reason.
Plot reasons.
Yeah. Like you can't fly a ship into the Nexus because it'll explode. It's like, well, it doesn't matter if the ship explodes, because you're going to be in the Nexus, right? Like,
I didn't even think about that.
You can be on a planet and the planet can explode, and that's fine.
Right.
But you can't fly a ship into it for some reason. So they figure out there's a planet that he is going to have to be on. To do so, he's going to have to destroy a star, which is going to destroy a planet that has 230 million pre-industrial people on it. So they have to stop him. They go to that planet. Soren beams down to the surface of the planet to launch his torpedo from the planet, which, why he didn't launch it from the bird of prey, I don't know, but he has to launch it from the planet, whatever, it's cool. Lursa and B'Etor agree to a prisoner exchange. That's, I love the scene when they ask for Geordi to be exchanged and they're like, in exchange for what? And their answer is not just like, in exchange for not blowing you immediately out of the sky. They make such a big deal about how a 20-year-old bird of prey is no match for the Enterprise. And then that does not play out at all.
Yeah, because the only reason that they were able to, the bird of prey was able to attack the Enterprise is because they send Geordi back to the Enterprise and then they use his hacked visor to see their specs so that they can adjust their weapons to the specs. But the Enterprise could have just killed them.
Right.
Before any of that happened. I guess they would have killed Geordi.
Yeah.
If he was still on board, but
even then they could have just immediately, there's so much logic that doesn't really quite work out at the end of this movie.
Just to summarize what Lursa and B'Etor want and why they're working with Malcolm McDowell. He has
trilithium,
which they can use to make an unbeatable weapon.
Yes. And they want to try to reassert themselves and take over the Klingon Empire.
Oh, so why do they want to destroy the Enterprise?
Also unclear.
Okay, that was confusing to me.
At that point, they have absolutely no reason for sticking around other than, I guess, they want to declare war on the Federation too, which again seems very poor, very short-sighted on their behalf.
Because they have the trilithium.
They've got the trilithium or the little pad. The
instruction manual.
Yeah, they have the instruction manual and in theory the key to decrypt it. So they can just leave.
Yeah, so it seems like their plan all along was to destroy the Enterprise because that is why they manipulated Geordi's visor so that they could use it to spy on the Enterprise.
Right. It doesn't make any sense.
Okay.
It's a very, very
just
flimsy
making sure
plot.
I didn't miss something because I was like, why are they doing this?
So, yeah, they peek through Geordi's visor. They find the Enterprise's shield frequencies and shoot a torpedo through it. They don't take out the Enterprise's weapons. So, again, the Enterprise is still armed and able to fight back. But it takes them a very long time to break through their defenses. I don't know why a bird of prey has a submarine-style periscope. That doesn't make any sense to me.
That's the least of our worries right now.
I don't think there's ever been a periscope shown. Maybe in some of the earlier movies that I'm not remembering, but definitely not on Next Generation. But they have a periscope, which doesn't make any sense on a spaceship.
This whole scene is so confusing.
They pull a periscope down and are shooting at the Enterprise from the periscope, which I'm just imagining like a little periscope sticking up from the top of this spaceship.
I'm also confused because when I think it's Malcolm McDowell says something, or no, maybe it's one of the Klingons says something about attacking the Enterprise, and one of the sisters says, we're no match for a Galaxy class starship or something like that. So I know that the Klingon weapons can penetrate the defenses because they got the shield specs, but should they not still be susceptible to the power of the Enterprise, even with their shields up?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. All right. I don't care. I don't care anymore.
They do a science thing. Well, they do a science thing to make the ship start to cloak, and then they blow it up with a single photon torpedo. But the reason they do that is because they recycled footage from the end of Star Trek VI.
Oh, really?
That's why it's an older bird of prey, and it's just blown up with a single explosion. They just straight up lifted footage from Star Trek VI and used that explosion all over again.
Okay. And meanwhile, they had agreed to a prisoner exchange, Geordi for Picard, but they sent him right to the planet where Malcolm McDowell is, so he's not their prisoner.
Right. Picard is like, I'll agree to a prisoner exchange, but only if you send me to where Soren is. And they're like, yeah, okay, that seems fair, I guess.
You know what? I thought more highly of Lursa and B'Etor. I thought that they were smarter than that.
I don't even think B'Etor gets named in this movie. You just have to know who she is. They say Lursa's name a few times, but I don't think they ever even say B'Etor's name.
This was not a well thought through plan.
It was not a well thought through movie.
Yeah, no, as we're talking about it more, I'm seeing that I was blinded by my love for the characters, but a lot of this doesn't make any sense.
During the battle, that unnamed ensign who's been around for a while, she was an extra in a lot of episodes of Next Generation. Well, she gets rocked and she has to get relieved. But then Riker is like, Troi, you go fly the ship now. There's so many other people on the bridge. And for some reason, he's like, Troi, you fly us.
And this is where things have descended into absolute chaos on the bridge, where I was thinking, okay, well, I take back what I said before when there was chaos on the bridge of the Enterprise B. And I was like, oh, my Enterprise crew would never behave this way. Well, I was wrong.
They blow up the bird of prey, R.I.P. Lursa and B'Etor. There's a coolant leak. The Enterprise starts to go down, so they do get in one last saucer separation. Geordi gets in one last emergency door roll, as he always does.
Yes.
There's the big evacuation sequence. A little girl drops her teddy bear, and no one gives a shit.
Yeah, why would they? It seemed like it was supposed to be very poignant and touching.
Or like maybe there was a deleted scene or something.
Maybe.
But yeah, no, just like replicate a new bear kid.
Well, and there was also a little moment where there were a bunch of abandoned children that had to be pawned off on other people.
Yeah.
It's like, okay.
I also thought it was weird that they were evacuating sickbay, and it's like, wouldn't sickbay be in the saucer
you would
section?
think for that exact reason. If you go to all of the trouble of setting up the ship so that it can be separated in the event of an emergency, you would have sickbay in the safe section.
It's very sad. Iconic ship crashing to the ground. Even that was in the trailer, like part of the saucer section flying through the atmosphere and Riker saying brace for impact. That made it into the trailer. So it wasn't necessarily apparent that they were going to destroy the D, but there were a lot of spoilers.
Sorry, I'm juvenile.
On the planet, Picard and Soren are just chilling. Picard finds a hole through the force field. I
have to say, when he was throwing things to try to determine where the force field was, I was very much reminded of Katniss in the Hunger Games.
Oh.
In Catching Fire, when she does the exact same thing.
Right.
And there's a straight line between Katniss and Jean-Luc Picard.
Right. No, clearly they're, they probably, I don't know when, never really says when the Hunger Games are supposed to take place. It's like an alternate version. Katniss Everdeen is an alternate universe version of Jean-Luc Picard.
Yes, I love it.
He tries to stop Soren, fails. Soren launches his missile probe in a scene that does not understand how light works. And the star is destroyed. The Nexus envelops them. Everyone dies. The end.
I did not think that was going to be the end of that.
But it was. It's a very bleak down moment.
I mean, the Enterprise explodes. There are people walking along the top of it.
Everything blows up and it cuts to black. And then, just kidding, Picard is in the Nexus with his very Victorian fake family. He is, I've said this before, the world's most British Frenchman.
Yes, 100%.
His fantasy is a Victorian Christmas.
Yes. And he has so many children.
And all his family have British accents too, which is funny. My headcanon is that French is a dead language like Latin at this point in the 24th century. No one actually speaks French anymore, and everyone is speaking English. So there's sort of a broad European accent, and everyone just has a British accent.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fine. There was a British Empire, and so whatever. So what year is it in Enterprise D time?
I want to say 2384.
2384.
Something like that.
And
I can look it up.
I'm saying, what, 17th, 18th century is this fantasy life. So that's about 700 years in the past. So that would be if we were like, my fantasy is to live in the year 1300.
But they're not. There's electricity. And so it's clearly, it's not even like Victorian fantasy. It's just They're all doing Victorian cosplay for some reason.
It's so weird.
Yes, he has his family and a bunch of kids. Apparently Picard's fantasy is to be a paterfamilias.
Renee is alive. His nephew is there. That was a little heartbreaking. Mm-hmm. All of his kids love him so much.
Right. Papa.
World's greatest dad.
World's greatest fake British Victorian dad.
Yes, that's what they put on his coffee mug.
Then Guinan's echo just shows up, which, like, does everyone else get like a spirit guide to the Nexus? Or do they just have their fantasies and they're left alone to figure out what's going on?
Even if they don't, it makes sense because it's Guinan. Like, she's always going to find a way to get involved in the situation and give her 2 cents. That's very on brand for Guinan.
Yeah. She lets him know what's going on, even though he's already kind of figured it out on his own. And he's like, well, I'm going to need help. And she says, well, I know somebody else who might be able to help you.
I do just need to note that my favorite part of this scene in the Nexus is that Picard is looking at his fake family and presumably trying to decide if he wants to stay in the Nexus or if he wants to try to go back and prevent the destruction of the planet and the Enterprise and et cetera, et cetera. So he's kind of looking at the fake family and then he goes back to Guinan and she is just riding around on a little carousel while she gives him her sage advice.
I think it's really funny that they spend a lot of time talking about how seductive the Nexus is and how once you enter the Nexus, you're never really going to leave. And Picard and Kirk spend collectively all of 20 minutes in there and they're like, no, I'm good.
Yeah.
It really isn't that seductive for them. They're fine. So maybe it's just Elarians. Maybe Elarians are
maybe
particularly tuned to needing to stay in the Nexus or something like that. Or there's something about humans being immune to it. But I
mean, that does sort of make sense because Guinan describes the feeling of being in the Nexus as being more content than she had ever been. But I mean, humans are by nature not content. I don't think that we honestly can handle too much contentness. We like excitement and drama, and Starfleet captains more so than the average human.
All right, Agent Smith from The Matrix.
Just saying.
Picard then goes to talk to Kirk because apparently you can just go to somebody else's Nexus fantasy.
Apparently.
It doesn't even seem like it's hard for him. He just shows up.
Well, he did have Guinan as a guide.
Right.
Guinan.
Guinan. They have their fun scene. We talked about how they do have good chemistry, and that's a fun scene. We learn about Kirk's unseen girlfriend, Antonia. She's seen. She's just a silhouette on a horse. Picard has no chill in that scene, especially when Kirk is going to go propose to his girlfriend who is presumably in bed, and Picard's just like, nah, I'm going in.
I noted that too.
He doesn't even knock.
That's not cool, Picard.
But it doesn't matter because they actually go into a magic barn instead of Antonia's bedroom.
It's kind of a sad magic barn. It's like the house is very brightly lit. Thank God for once there's light in this movie. But it's a little cheerful. And then when Picard follows him into what he believes is the bedroom, it's now a dark, dim barn. And, I took that to be representative of Kirk realizing that, he couldn't stay here. I don't know. I thought maybe there was some thematic elements there, but maybe not. Maybe they just ran out of light budget.
It really does not take long for Picard to talk Kirk into helping either.
No, not at all.
Like I said, from Kirk's perspective, he's been there for all of 5 minutes and now he's chopping wood. And he's like, all right. And then he's like, oh, my girlfriend's up there. My dead dog. All right, I'll go help you save the universe. Whatever.
They have hero complexes.
They have a conversation. Kirk mentions Spock. And I also am, the nerd in me is really mad that Picard doesn't say, oh yeah, I met Spock. He's cool. And also I mind melded with his dad and Spock.
He's cool. I would pay $100 million to watch a movie where Jean-Luc Picard says, I met Spock. He's cool.
You have no chill. Apparently, all it takes to leave the Nexus is just deciding you want to leave.
Yes,
Again,
I had the same note.
There's no effort. They just are like, just pick a direction and ride off on a horse.
There we go. We're out of here.
Again, maybe it's just a problem for the Elarians. The Elarians are like, this is bliss. This is amazing. And humans are like, I don't get it. We have holodecks.
Yeah. That's the best explanation, a better explanation than any others.
They travel back in time. Picard takes one of the most famous Starfleet captains of all time, and their plan is to go back 5 minutes and try to punch a guy on a bridge.
An actual bridge, not the bridge of a ship.
Right. Like, that's their plan. That's what he needs help with. He's like, yeah, let's go here and punch Soren. And again, it doesn't go great.
No.
It goes poorly.
Well, at first it seems like it's going great. It seems like they're working in conjunction.
Mm-hmm.
They're teaming up. It's kind of cool. Captains are doing it for themselves. But then things go awry, as they so often do.
His action, but it's all like just three relatively old guys punching each other.
Yeah. It's honestly kind of sad.
So then they split up. Kirk goes to get the remote control to make the missile visible, which you got to wonder, why did he even make the missile visible in the first place if it could still fire while it was cloaked?
We don't have time.
There's no time for that now. He makes the missile visible and then the bridge breaks and he falls. Picard then locks the missile clamps in place. The missile blows up and takes Soren out. And then Picard goes to see Kirk have his dying moment.
Yes, because I thought Kirk was still alive, which he is when Picard first gets to him. Mm-hmm. But then he's gone.
I do think that scene was well acted by Shatner. And I think, people give Shatner a hard time for being notoriously over the top, but I think he can be a good actor sometimes.
I think he can be a good actor.
And that scene was...
he's great in Miss Congeniality.
Yeah, I think he does well here. I think it's a bit of a disappointing send-off for Captain Kirk, especially for people who had been fans of the show for 40 years and had followed him. But it's better than him getting shot in the back by a one-movie bad guy.
Yeah, I would say that's a better ending for him.
But it's still not great. Picard then buries him in a pile of rocks, and his stand-in mourns Kirk from a helicopter shot. It is very obviously not Patrick Stewart standing there.
I didn't notice.
It's his stand-in, apparently.
I was crying.
Aw.
Actually, I don't think I was crying at that part. I was crying a few minutes later, though. We might get to what made me tear up.
And then the movie kind of wraps up. It does feel like the ending of a Star Trek The Next Generation episode at this point, when they're picking up the debris of the Enterprise. Picard picks up I remember reading criticism of Picard picking up one of his priceless artifacts and then just chucking it aside for a family album with some chintzy photos in it.
Well, his family died in a fire.
Fire, and digital photographs don't exist in the 24th century, so he's got to make sure that he gets those.
Yeah, he doesn't have even like a flash
those precious
drive.
hard copies. Data and Troi are wandering around looking for things, and that's when Data finds Spot.
And that is when I cried. His
emotional moment. Apparently, Brent Spiner didn't even want to do that scene.
Why?
I don't know. It just said he apparently complained about having Data find the cat.
That's the most relatable thing in the whole movie to me.
Honestly, it is good that they left it in. I think it's a good Data beat, and it's a good button on the whole emotion chip debacle and everything else. And
yeah, absolutely. Because I did find his emotional crisis throughout the movie, parts of it to be pretty relatable as a very emotional person. But him finding Spot and saying, I'm happy to see him, but I'm crying. Maybe the chip is malfunctioning. And then Troi says, I think it's working just right. Mm-hmm. And that, to me, I'm like that because that's true. Sometimes emotions are, they're conflicting, or you are having an intense reaction. So I thought that was a great scene.
Yeah, I thought so too. I think it's a good scene. I think it's very funny that just before that, Marina Sirtis has always struggled with Troi's accent. It's also funny, early in the show, so she kind of went with an alien accent, but then you see both her parents and they both speak with just regular American accents. So it never made any sense. So she sort of just gradually shifted Troi's accent to kind of an American accent. Like her alien accent went down, but it just ends up being a unique Troi accent. And this movie, especially in that last scene, there's a couple of moments where she almost just slips into British.
Well, like you said, it was kind of rushed.
And then that's the movie. They have Picard and Riker have their little conversation. Riker's disappointed he's never going to get to captain this Enterprise. And they're like, well, there's probably going to be other ships named Enterprise in the future. Spoiler alert, there are.
I'm shocked.
And that's it. The movie just ends, basically.
Yeah,
that's
kind of
it.
Anticlimactic.
It is very anticlimactic. The whole, I don't know, the third act of the movie doesn't work for me. It very much falls apart. Like I said, there's fun scenes in the movie. I do like the Data Picard stuff. There's other just fun moments, but for the most part, it's just not it's not a good movie. And there's two much better Next Generation movies and one that's much, much worse. But yeah, this movie's it just exists.
No, I would not disagree that it's not a great movie, but I enjoyed myself. And as I've said a couple times, I think that was probably mostly because I missed them. I had a hard time saying goodbye when the show ended.
Well, it was even harder because at the time it was like we had to wait, it was May when the series ended, and then you're waiting and it's like, they're going to get to do movies. There's going to be a big movie. And then you go to see this movie and you're like, it's a nonsensical plot and all the lights are out for some reason.
Well, when the show ended, did you already know that the movie was going to be coming?
No.
Later that year? Okay. Because I'm thinking I was very sad to watch the finale of the show, but I didn't know we were going to be watching this anytime soon. So I didn't have it to look forward to. But it sounds like it was similar when the show actually ended in real time.
Yeah, no, I don't think they started putting trailers out or anything till the summer. So it was just disappointing. And so I'm sorry. It's funny. This is the first movie we've done for the podcast that it isn't a movie that I actually really enjoyed. I'm showing it to you more out of obligation than anything else because we're getting to a point in Deep Space Nine where they're going to start referencing the destruction of the Enterprise. So I
had to know.
I didn't want you to get to that in Deep Space Nine when there's an offhand line about, well, since the Enterprise was destroyed, and you'd be like, wait, what?
Although, to be perfectly honest, there is a non-0% chance that I would just be like, doo-doo-doo. I don't even notice what they're saying. I don't clock this at all.
Mixed in with the technobabble.
Yeah.
All right, so final thoughts on Star Trek Generations.
I mean, like you said, it was not a great movie. There were issues. As a Data lover, the character, not the information. I was not pleased with his quote unquote humor. That's not how I like my Data.
Right.
I think the higher definition of the movie did not do many favors to the actors because this was right after the show ended and a lot of them looked so much older, which I attributed to the quality of the movie.
Well, that and just the terrible lighting.
And the terrible lighting.
You have bad lighting, it's going to give you shadows and... Absolutely.
Things that didn't make sense, a little bit disjointed, but overall, I still loved seeing my pals.
A good time, a romp with your pals.
Yeah, that's how I felt.
Well, we established I did not care for this movie, but I am glad that we watched it, and I'm glad that I was able to share more time with your friends with you. So thank you for listening once again. I'm Dan.
I'm Heather.
And this has been Blind Spots and Second Thoughts.